My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Good afternoon and welcome to Dublin City FM. You're listening to LGBT Live with me, Mick FitzGerald, on today, this most auspicious day for the LGBT community. The 23rd of May, I'll always remember it, not as the day we voted, but as the day we made history, because that was the day the votes were counted in the marriage equality referendum. I was up in Dublin Castle when it happened, and it is a day I will never forget. And it is appropriate, but pure coincidence, it's appropriate that we have today in the studio a highly respected member of the LGBT community, Martina Malone. So, Martina, welcome to LGBT Life.
Hi, Mick. Thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting me.
You're very welcome, Martina. Martina, I suspect, like myself, it's a day that will stay with you until we go into the ground.
Oh, I think so, yeah. The sense of elation after the vote had been counted and announced to the nation was overwhelming. And I don't really know how to describe the sense of elation. And the only thing that I could think of in my head was it must have been what it was like for Black South Africa to vote, after apartheid and that kind of stuff. Yeah. That's the only thing that I could. That sense that that your country had accepted you as an equal member of society was huge.
I don't know if you'd agree with me about this, but I mean, you and I were of the same generation in that sense of the word. And over the years, we would have experienced on a collective level a whole range of emotions, happiness, sadness, anger, frustration, a whole range of them. But on that day, I experienced something that I have never experienced before in Ireland, and that was collective joy.
Oh yeah, that was. I think I've said that to somebody before, that it was even better than Pride that we celebrate every year, because it included everybody, and there seemed to be a spontaneous, after the vote had been announced in Dublin Castle, as you say, there was a spontaneous outpouring of joy and people just waving their rainbow flags, gay and straight. Yep. So that was wonderful. I mean, all the hassle and everything that we'd gone through previously for all our lives just seemed to disappear with that counting of the vote.
Yeah. I have to give you an anecdote, because I was around the press area where the stage was, and I was going around taking a few photographs and doing some videos, and I came across this lady. She would have been in her 70s, and she was wheelchair bound, and I was just having, exchanging a few words to her, and she said to me something that I thought was really, really memorable. She said to me, "I've got a gay nephew, or a gay grandson," and she said, "and I thought about this. If I didn't have a gay grandson, would I have voted yes?" And she said, "And I realised I would." And I thought that was something that just summed up the mood, didn't it?
It certainly did, yeah. And to find that when we had been canvassing beforehand and calling on doors, certainly when we started campaigning initially, or canvassing, which was in March 2015, in door to door, I was in the Blackrock Munstown area. I was door-to-door coordinator for the canvass then, and we started in March, even before the clock went forward, so the evenings were darker, so we had a very small window of opportunity. And initially that sense of, oh well, I'd do that anyway, wasn't there. Now part of that was our own fear of what we were going to experience from door to door, but as we were going on and getting there and finding maybe older gay or lesbian people when we were knocking on doors, and to sense their joy, or to experience them being delighted that another gay person was campaigning on behalf of them and their equality and their inclusion in wider society. To see it then being translated into a yes vote on the day was just extraordinary.
It was some friends of ours, and these would be, what I would call private school, very middle class, upper middle class boys. And they went canvassing in Ballyfermot, and they were really wary because, they were concerned about, LGBT being stereotyped amongst working class people, and it was all this mixture of stereotyping, and they were openly welcomed, and they were really impressed the fact that they were openly welcomed.
Yeah, and that in itself is an achievement. It's probably a reflection of wider society becoming more open. I hope that's the case anyway, and certainly since the vote on the 23rd of May in 2015, I think that is there's a sense that is the way it is, that Ireland has become more open and more accepting and more tolerant. That doesn't mean that we should be complacent in any way. I think, unfortunately, there's always the possibility.
Well, I think the other point that's worth mentioning as well is that it was, to a certain degree, it was always assumed that LGBT was an urban or a metropolitan issue. But the vote across the country showed that this was a national outpouring in that sense, and I thought that was incredibly important.
It is, and I think what was important too is what was striking us was when we were canvassing, and you have to mention people like Grania Healy and all those, and Glenn and all those who were very involved in. It was a well organised campaign, but and telling people's stories, personal stories, were what was hitting a note with people. And particularly nowadays, I think people don't want to see their sons, daughters, nieces and nephews being discriminated for no other good reason than because they're gay and lesbian. And that was a big thing now, whereas maybe 20 or 30 years ago people's families were ashamed of their sons or daughters if they said that they were gay and lesbian. So that shift in society has happened. Families now don't want their own sons and daughters discriminated against for no other good reason than because they're gay. So that reflected right across the country, I think, not just in the urban areas.
How did you feel about the no vote? Did you feel, obviously a no vote is negative, but did you find their tactics were negative?
Yes, and I think as the campaign was going on, they were actually shooting themselves in the foot. A lot of the time we didn't have to say anything at all. They were doing damage to their own campaign. They didn't really have valid arguments, talking about, they were turning it into an argument about children, as if me being married to my partner was going to affect their family and their children, and it was a very negative, sometimes very nasty campaign. But I think the focus all along was that we were going to maintain our own dignity and keep our eye on the prize, and the eye on the prize was that we were going to be full equal citizens within our constitution.
Yeah, and without mentioning names, because there were a couple of people that were very prominent in the I'm a gay man, but I don't agree with marriage equality.
Right,
Exactly. I found that a very strange one. It was a bit like saying, "Well, I'm an African American, but I don't disagree with slavery."
That's right. Yeah, it doesn't. Fine, if that's the way you feel, that's the way you feel, and if you just want your 15 minutes of fame because you're a mouthpiece for these people. Oh, great, good for you. But if the rest of us, to me, it was never just an issue about allowing gay people to get married. It was an issue of equality, and it was an issue of inclusion for gay and lesbian people, that our relationships are every bit as important to us, and they're every bit as valuable to us, and they're they mean something, and that our families are important and valid and worthwhile. And I think we've proved that those of us who are in long-term relationships, committed relationships, whatever it is, or those of us who have spent a number of years campaigning for gay equality and gay inclusion, know the sense of huge acceptance and tolerance, vibrancy and diversity that our LGBT family is. And I couldn't ever see myself not wanting to campaign for a wonderful community of people like we are,
Unlike myself, you, I suspect, spent most of your adult life in Ireland. Now, I left Ireland when I was 21 or 22, and it was to a certain degree. I left what I saw as a culture that I didn't really want to be any way part of. It was a very inward-looking culture. It was a very prescriptive culture in that sense of the word. And I said to people, the 23rd of May, and this is why it's important to me, was the first time I think ever I felt proud to be Irish, because we stood up and said, hold on, this is who we are and this is what we stand for, and whatever Darby O'Gill and all of that stuff, this is actually who we are.
Exactly, yeah. And I would have had the same feeling. You're right, I didn't live I've never lived abroad or worked abroad. I've worked here all my adult life, and I like Ireland, but I have a completely different perspective of Ireland since the passing of the marriage equality referendum. That's when you could really see a palpable shift in the mindset of Irish people, that we weren't going to tolerate our citizens being second-class citizens for no other good reason than they were gay. And that made me very proud to be Irish. I'm very, very proud of people, gay and straight, who voted yes. Oh yeah, I would have that same sense, and a little cynical, and very would be always very critical.
Well, by experience.
Yeah, by experience,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to see that shift and see that changing, and to be part of it, however small a way, when I was a young adult, I'm saying young when I'm in my 20s, to now, and to have been part of that somewhere along the way is makes you proud. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
I suspect you're the same, but the following day was a Sunday, and I was the first thing I got was a call from a friend of mine in Australia just to congratulate us on what we did, and then I had another call from a cousin of mine, an LGBT cousin of mine in New York, and it was, as you say, it was. The South Africans might have thrown out apartheid, but we threw out another yoke, and I think that was recognised.
I think so, yeah. I think so. I didn't have people from abroad ringing me because my family are not abroad. My biological family are not abroad. But I did have colleagues in work congratulating, straight colleagues in work, and a manager in work. A couple of them texted me to say, well done, I hope you're proud of all you've achieved, which is very, very moving, particularly coming from straight colleagues and straight managers. I thought was wonderful. It's a wonderful acceptance. No, I didn't get it from a whole load of them, but I got it from one or two, and that matters.
It does, doesn't it? Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Well, Dublin City Council have, or Dublin City Libraries, who we're big fans of in this radio station, they've got an archive now, their digital archive, and I'm hoping that someday, because I took a load of photographs and videos and everything, I want that day will be preserved for perpetuity, because in 100 years' time we want people to look back and see this is what it was.
Exactly, and I agree with you, and I love the libraries as well. I started off my life in Dublin City Council in the public libraries. My partner is a librarian. I love the libraries. I think they provide a great service, and they really are. So you need to get onto the archives and talk to them. I know the LGBT archive is probably in the National Library, which is in Dublin City Council, but I'm kind of biased. I'd like Dublin City.
As I say, they've got a digital archive now, and I'm trying to persuade people that this should be opened up, so that there is, of course, we've got all the civic dimension to it, but there should be what I would call a people's dimension.
There should be, and I think, to be honest with you, they probably will, and the senior management in the libraries are always very supportive. In fact, they've had great exhibitions during LGBT History Month in Pearse Street Library and around. So. Go for it.
So tell me, looking back a bit, Martina, did you grow up in Dublin?
I did, yeah. I'm from Glasnevin originally.
Okay, a North Sider.
A North Sider, yeah, like yourself, yeah. I grew up in Glasnevin, and I went to Loreto College School, so I was baptised a Catholic and brought up as a Catholic. I mean, I would have always known I was lesbian. I may not have had the language for it when I was very young as a child, but I certainly did when I was in my teens, and I stayed very, very closeted until I was in my early 20s. Mainly because it's this thing that we have put in our strategy. The serious thing is that lack of visibility for gay people, particularly when I was growing up. I mean, I know you mentioned the first Gay Rights March here, which was in 1983, and I would have been 19 at the time. I didn't even know it was on, because there wasn't. Where would I have gone to know that?
Absolutely,
like that, unless you kind of happened to bump into somebody else who was gay, but how did you even express that to one another? You didn't. So as things were getting, it would have been around the decriminalisation, and you'd hear more and more of it, and you'd say, Kieran Rose and all of those people on the Late Late, or Joni Crone on the Late Late Show, and then I'm going, you know what, there's more than just me out there. So that would be a kind of a slow coming out with me, I came out in my 20s, all right, and I came out to my family in my 20s, and I was out in work when I was in my 20s, and it was far from easy, I can assure you. Far from easy. I mean, I didn't work in Dublin City Council until 1997, but it was far from easy, I can tell you, being out and being the only gay in the workplace at the time.
Well, what I say to people, because language tends to be important in these things, I'm a bit older than yourself, and when I was growing up, I would say, based on the relationship and how I knew the people, particularly in the classes that I was in, that there was nobody gay. You know, statistically, that's impossible. So now I make jokes and say, I wonder who the others were.
Yeah.
But what I say to people is there was no gay in Ireland because the word gay wasn't used at all. There were just queers.
That's
and
right.
that's what, and that was always a derogatory term. There was always a derogatory term. And usually, and I don't know if you were involved in the Edmund Lynch movie.
Yeah, I was actually.
The piece that I did, I was saying in the time I grew up, gay was queer was a derogatory term because queer usually was some sleazy Christian brother or some sleazy priest. It wasn't a term that you would embrace. It wasn't even it wasn't an activity you would embrace because to me it was oppression. From simply, and it was only particularly when I went to London in the early 70s and I got to mix with people then. And I could see, hold on, this is a celebration. This isn't something that you should be ashamed of. Yeah. These were people who understood who they were proud of who they were, and to a certain degree flaunted who they were. And that was a big revelation for me.
Well, that's an interesting thing to say, because the big thing for me growing up wasn't so much the queer bit. It was fear. It was fear of being isolated from your peers, huge fear of being found out. And even when I was gradually coming out and being careful about where I come out to, the people, you're right, the ones that got the real ire and bile thrown at them were gay men. I never particularly embraced the term queer. I actually don't like it because of the negative connotations with it. Dyke I don't mind, funnily enough. Queen I don't mind. Because I think I've embraced that, and I love dykes, and I love the separateness and the uniqueness of both gay and lesbian communities. I love them, but I think equally, because you have to have that sense of inheritance, and you have to have that sense of history of where you've come from and where we've all come from as a community. But we also need to be included as well, and included as normal everyday human beings, because that's what we are really. You know, okay, we have a separate sort of identity or a separate culture, maybe, or separate history. But that sense of isolation and a dyke and a derogatory, and you're to be made fun of, you were to be excluded, there was something wrong with you, the usual negative stuff. I never actually felt that, though. You know, I felt the fear, I felt the isolation, but I never actually felt that there was something wrong with me. I just thought I was a bit different, and choosing who I should tell that to, unique, exactly, and choosing who I would tell that to wasn't easy. And in fact, I remember the first person I did tell outside of my family was somebody whom we were friends in school, a schoolmate, and from that good day to this we've never spoken, you know. So it is. So things have certainly moved on from there, you know.
You know, another anecdote for you. I even now, 50 years later, I still call, well, 40 years later anyway, I still call people petal. And the genesis of that is that I think it was 1972 or 73. In the early 70s, if you weren't a communist, you were nobody. You were, you know, everybody was a communist.
True,
And one day in Trinity, and I went to UCD. One day in Trinity, they were having, it was May Day, and everybody was going around comrade this and comrade that and comrade the other. So we decided we'd call it Gay Day.
Okay.
So we called it Gay Day, and we went around calling each other petal. How are you petal?
Well, people did do things like that.
And as a result of that, and that was a very liberating thing to say, because you weren't supposed to say that, and it was really in your, you know, going up to hard-nosed communists and saying, well, petal. But I take your point on that one, because we went up to Bartley Duns when Bartley Duns was there, and I remember going into Bartley Duns. There were about three of us, and as I say to people, I used to be a twink. We went in there and it was dark, and I found it a bit sad because there were people around the place, and that struck me as that was what the isolation was about. Simply because people were made to feel that way.
Or you weren't safe going into those places either. I know I wouldn't have been a huge frequenter. I was aware of it all right in Bartley Duns, but we used to go into JJ's. I don't know if you remember JJ's. I think it was there used to be two nights in JJ's. I think one of them was a Thursday night for some very strange reason, which is I would normally consider to be a sober night because you'd be up on Friday, and a Saturday night. But there were kips, and I remember with the first time I ever went into it, I think I walked around the block about 5 times hoping nobody had seen me, and then going in and then and then you go and lied about where you were. I mean, those days you just don't want them again.
Well, again, it's an interesting one because what I also found is that there was a class dimension to this, because if you went to somewhere like Bartley Dons, generally speaking, you were lower middle class as a rule, whereas you could be gayish or a bit artistic or a bit eccentric, and you went to Davy Burns.
That's right.
And you were okay there, and you could sit around and have sweet sherries and so on and so forth. And I always thought that's the class nature of the beast, if you like.
That's right. Well, that's true. But I think with JJ's, every class of dyke was there, you know.
So now, were there many places for women to
No,
to
there
meet?
wasn't really. JJ's was the one. Certainly back then, I don't even know when that was, probably in the 80s. I think it was in the 80s anyway. Oh, for kips. Kips, you know. But I loved it because at least you could feel safe for the time that you were there, you know. And there was others like you. And the thing about whether they were kips or not, the more you were meeting people like yourself and the more you were making friends, you would then socialise in their homes and other places, so you're getting to meet a broader mix of people.
Okay.
So it wasn't all just revolving around a kip of a pub either. I mean, there was all sorts of things that people started up earlier on, like this women and whatever else there was, the women's weekend and you know, all of those kind of things. And you went to everything and you read everything, no matter how negative it was, just to be part of a community of
it must have been quite small in those days, was it?
Yes, it was. And what I used to find quite difficult, actually, and I think I've probably learned to be a lot more tolerant and accepting over the years, is that I used to kind of bug me if people weren't out. You know, that used to bug me.
Okay.
I used to think, look, you need to be out, you need to be seen, you're never going to be taken seriously unless you're proud of yourself, and you're comfortable with yourself, and just be out. And as you mentioned earlier there about the petals and all of that, and putting it in your face, I've always loved very gay men for that, very camp queens for that, because they just, there they are, in your face. And I suppose in some ways, though, it hides a lot of the stuff. In some ways it's a defence, because it hides a lot of the hurt, but it also keeps people slightly at a distance. They're able to say, hold on, I'm creating my boundaries here, my space, I'm a queen, get used to it, you know. And so I have a lot of time for visibility, I have a lot of time for people who are out. I have become hugely tolerant over the years of people who aren't. I had a lot to learn that way, you know, because people have to come out. It's their own journey, it's their own personal journey. They come out when they're ready and they're able to do that, and you don't know what their personal circumstances either. But for us to be taken seriously and to make sure our needs are not somehow forgotten, however unintentionally, or not included, you need to be out, and you need to be a focal point for somebody, and there has to be somebody leading on LGBT issues, whether it's in the workplace, in society generally. There has to be that focal point for someone. You know, so.
We may, if the polls are correct, we are likely to have our first LGBT Taoiseach in a couple of weeks' time. Now, I'm leaving aside his politics, whatever they are. But if you go to Iceland has a lesbian prime minister for quite some time.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's much more of a milestone than having an LGBT Taoiseach. That would then show a certain level of acceptance. But just coming back to that, do you think it might have been more difficult to be LGBT and female than it would have been male? There are different pressures, I appreciate that.
Yes, there probably were. I don't know whether, because it's interesting, in our own network in Dublin City Council, I mean, there has to be as many gay lesbians or gay women as there are gay men.
Of course.
But the ones that are visible, they're predominantly, our wider network is predominantly male. Both gay men and bisexuals, but and so there's a smaller number of women on the wider network, and why that is, I'm not really 100% sure, but I do, and they just don't come out that as easily in the workplace for whatever reason. I know they're glad we're there because people have contacted us privately, and we have three sort of groups. We have the steering committee, we have the wider network, and we have another group, a much smaller group that's known just to me, and I keep them updated. It's just because they don't want to be out at all, and those people are women. So for whatever reason, women seem to have more difficulty with it, and maybe it's because of the old sexist stereotypes, you know, that if women didn't get married to a man or didn't have a male partner, that they were somehow lesser women than women who married men.
Well, it's interesting when I see what I would call the late outers. They're invariably women
Yes.
who've played the game.
Yeah.
You know, perhaps always knew that something wasn't quite. But they played the game. They had the children. They had the husband, and then maybe in their 40s suddenly realised, hold on, I don't have to do this anymore.
Something shifts for them maybe, but then you know. People then women who just don't come out, maybe either stay married in a heterosexual marriage or just stay single, and that saddens me in some ways. Okay, if they're happy that way, that's great, but it saddens me in some ways that they're depriving themselves of a very loving community and a wonderful community of gay people. I just love the gay family, you know.
Yeah. Let's move on because we're about to run out of time, even though we could talk about this for the afternoon, couldn't we? 2 weeks, very recently, Dublin City Council launched its LGBT inclusion strategy. You're the chair of the LGBT network. Tell us about that, Martina. How important is this?
That came about actually because we joined Glen's Diversity Championship and their Equality Index, and part of doing that was to get feedback as to how we could improve our LGBT inclusion. And one of their recommendations to us is that we should have an LGBT inclusion strategy for employees now.
Indeed.
So we set about working on that. The steering committee in partnership with whatever about partnership, certainly with huge support from the executive manager in HR, Jerry Geraghty, and the Equality Office, Dennis Casey particularly. But that's how it came about, and that's how we decided to focus on that we'd have just achievable objectives with various action plans around those objectives. And the big thing, as we've already been discussing, is our visibility. That's huge for us. It's huge in an organisation because it's very easy to forget us. You don't get included in the pension benefits, you don't get included in force majeure leave, you know, not because somebody is being deliberately nasty. We're not seen, so therefore we don't matter, you know.
Well, what I thought was very interesting when Jerry was talking about it was he put it in a context and saying this isn't about tokenism, because if our employees are working to their capacity and working in a comfortable environment, that then translates into the service that's provided to your clients, which is again the citizens of Dublin. And I thought that was incredibly important to say.
Oh, it is. It's hugely important. You give of if you're allowed to be yourself in work, you're going to operate at the best where possible. And if you know that your organisation accepts you, even though you're different and you've had a history of being different and excluded, and you know that they accept you and they're willing to learn from you, that's hugely important, I think. And I'm kind of proud of the management in HR because of that, because they sort of said, okay, what do you need, what is it we're supposed to be doing, and they took it on board, which isn't always easy for a hierarchical organisation, you know. So they're to be admired, I think.
Yeah. Well, I would take issue and say everybody's different, but statistically, they always said, well, there's a norm out there, which is a word I hate.
Yeah.
But no, look.
There's a norm out there, which is a word I hate as well. But no more than with I'm back to the visibility thing again. If you have very often race and different nationalities and genders and all of those things are easier to see. The gay bit is never that easy to see, so the gay bit is easy to exclude, however unintentionally. So that's where we flag it and say we're here. Not quite we're queer, but
But well, what we discovered in the 23rd of May, not 2015, is that if you actually embrace difference rather than push it away, aren't we all stronger for it?
I think so,
as a
And
society,
people
aren't we?
feel better.
Absolutely.
And people, that positivity just has a ripple effect, goes out, broadens out, and it captures and embraces more.
Yeah. Martina, I'd love to be able to invite you back so that we could talk about the education and awareness and some of the other good things that Dublin City Council will be doing in the LGBT inclusion strategy. Sadly, we've run out of time today, but it has been an absolute delight to talk to you.
And we'd like to talk to you. Thank you. Thanks
Martina, that's Martina Malone, and she's the chair of the LGBT network in Dublin City Council. I want to say thank you to Angela for doing such a fabulous job on the desk. We'll be back in a week's time, and in the meantime, Dublin Edition will be coming up to tell you all the great things that are terrific about being in Dublin.
That I want to have a little pride in my it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say